This is the Guns Magazine podcast, episode number 23. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting people who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. Today, I'm talking with Rob Jones, the staff photographer for Guns Magazine and our sister publication, American Handgunner. Now, before we go further, one short housekeeping note. We've changed our numbering system. The old way of doing things was a little confusing, so from now on, all episodes, regardless of length or content, will be numbered sequentially. It's not a big change, but I think it'll make things a little easier going forward. Now, let's get on with the show. You know, there are probably more gun photographs published right now than any time in history, and if you run a blog, a website, or just enjoy sharing your gun pictures on social media, this is a must-listen episode. Rob is one of the leading firearms photographers in the country, and his work has graced everything from catalogs to the cover of many major gun magazines. He actually started out as a medical photographer, did other jobs including a stint on one of the famous swimsuit magazine editions, and wound up working as a full-time gun photographer from his studio in Pennsylvania. During our talk, we discussed some of the tricks of the trade, including ideas if you don't have the money or space to put together a full-blown photo studio. Rob talks about his process for setting up a photo shoot, visualizing your goals, how to work with light, improvised photo equipment, and tips for working with Photoshop and other post-processing software. And, oh yeah, we talk about why photographers shouldn't date the swimsuit models. Now here's my chat with Guns Magazine staff photographer, Rob Jones. Hey Rob, how's it going?
Doing well, thanks. You?
Well, we're all quarantined, but that's really not that unusual for me because I work from home.
Yeah, me too. Actually, it hasn't changed my day one bit.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking time out of your busy day and talking to us. You know, most everybody is stuck at home, kind of slowly going crazy. So I thought this might be a good time to talk to you, Rob Jones, firearms photographer extraordinaire, because, you know, there's a lot of firearm photography out there, especially on the web and social, and there's a lot of really good photography and there's a lot of really, really bad photography. So we thought we'd talk to a real live pro and maybe get some tips on how to take better pictures of your firearms. So Rob, you are the studio photographer for Guns and American Handgunner magazine and many, many other clients. How did you get started in this very unique field of being a studio firearms photographer?
It kind of started about 15 years ago. I was doing a lot of architectural photography, actually. I worked for builders and architects, mostly up and down the East Coast, and mostly high-end homes and commercial properties and that sort of thing. And I had buddies in the firearms industry and some in federal law enforcement, that kind of thing. And occasionally I'd get an inquiry about, hey, can you do some photography for this company or that company? So I kind of started getting into firearms a little bit. And there are some well-known 1911 smiths local to me. And so they kind of picked up on this. And so I started shooting 1911s, photographing 1911s. And it kind of was a side thing. And then back about, 2008, I believe it was, the housing market crashed. And all of a sudden, I had no income other than guns. So it kind of came out of necessity, but it was something I was really enjoying working on. And so, all right, well, what else do I know about besides architectural? Well, I know guns. I've been shooting my whole life and had done a fair amount of photography. So I kind of built it from there. And so it was kind of a word of mouth thing at first, and shooting a lot of handguns, a lot of 1911s, custom stuff, and ended up picking up clients anywhere from optics manufacturers to AR manufacturers, and it kind of went from there. It started to build after I started going to SHOT Show, which was maybe a dozen years ago, and so just got out and met some folks and built it from there.
And it just got completely out of hand.
It did, yeah. As it turns out, I enjoy shooting firearms or photograph. I can't have to watch that. Photographing firearms more than I ever did doing architectural work, which kind of worked out nicely.
This is a hard question to answer when you get asked, but what is it that is so interesting about this particular subject that really intrigues you?
I like really complicated photography. It's actually what I liked about doing architectural stuff. And if you look at the stuff like that I've done for guns or handgunner, it's pretty elaborate in the lighting. To me, I like to see every radius corner and every bit of checkering and that sort of thing. And that can get really complicated. And that's kind of what fascinates me about it.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't need to be that way, but I think if you're shooting magazine stuff, it should be that way. And so the complexity of it and, plus there's just cool guns all the time. So
exactly. We're united by our love of firearms. Now, you don't only do just cover shots for magazines and center spreads. You've done a lot of things like most photographers. Without naming names, you've done catalogs and all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah, actually, prior to doing the handgunner and FMG stuff, I did mostly catalogs and print advertising. That's kind of how all this got started, actually.
And we laughed. You told me a story a while, or some stories. I think one or two that can be repeated. But you even did what many guys would consider the ultimate dream job, which was a swimsuit edition photo shoot.
Yeah, actually, going back about 25 years, I worked for a swimwear company, actually one of the largest swimwear companies in the world, and it involved a lot of time on beaches and pretty girls. So who doesn't like that sort of thing? It actually was kind of a nightmare job. That there are just so many moving parts to that, and you get rain days and you're at the beach. There's nothing else to do but drink. Unfortunately, I don't drink, so it was far less than amusing to me.
Yeah.
But I had the responsibility for everything that happened on those shoots, and sometimes they just kind of get out of control.
And you don't end up dating supermodels.
Do not. Actually, it's a good way to get blacklisted. And yeah, it just on the upside, I never got Me Too'd, so we got that going for us.
Well, that's a good thing, I suppose.
So yeah, did that for a little while, and I kind of the cool thing about being a photographer. My degree is actually in medical photography, and I spent the first 6 years of my career photographing surgery, which was a fascinating job, but you can't make a great living at it. And so I kind of moved on after 6 years.
Yeah. Well, we kind of laughed before we started recording when I said, what is a typical day for a professional firearms photographer? And it sounds about kind of like being a work from home magazine editor, which is you stare out the window quite a bit and then panic and realize you're way behind the curve. So what's your day like?
It's exactly the same. Yeah. Typically I kind of have a workflow that starts with just the idea, how do I want to approach this shoot? What does the gun look like? What is it used for? Is it a target gun, a hunting gun, a everyday carry gun? And kind of go from there. But, we do a lot of like carry guns we do regularly. And how do I make this one different from the last one?
Yeah.
And so that's, to me, that's kind of the hard part. Once I figure that out.
And it is a collaborative process. I bounce ideas off of you. We all do. And you refine them and tell us sometimes that's not going to work. But you amaze me when I come up with a wild scheme, just a general concept, and you execute it. You find an old saddle or you find, just the right knife to go with it. Is your prop closet, it would be like Wonderland for any gun enthusiast?
Yeah. My wife and I kind of joke that on my retirement we're going to have the world's coolest yard sale. But I have a large stash of props, which is weapon lights and handheld lights and knives and tack gear and holsters and you name it, it's here.
Yeah. Well, we kind of got off on a tangent there. So what is your schedule? Do you spend most of the day shooting, or is it business or retouching, or what do you do during a day, typical day?
It's a little bit of everything. I work from home. We built our home about a dozen years ago, and I have a studio here. So I don't need to leave the house much, other than maybe to run and grab a prop or two, or run to the FFL and pick up guns. But that worked through for me getting started and figuring out where I'm going. I kind of plan this out farther than most photographers do before I get started.
Yeah.
And then, a lot of time wandering around the house staring at the floor, which my wife didn't understand when she stopped working a few years ago. This is what you do all day. That's the important part. And kind of knowing where you want to go before you get started is, at least for me, very important.
Yeah.
So then I usually go to a test shot, and that's something that you guys usually see. It's kind of just proves to me that I can pull off whatever it is I have in my head, and seeing what it looks like. And occasionally, that gets scrapped, but generally not. And so from there, I go to the shoot, assemble everything. I shoot pretty quickly. It's just something about the way I work.
Yeah.
And the style that you see in guns at Handgunner is kind of a combination of photography and Photoshop. So I spend a lot of time in Photoshop too, probably as much time as I spend shooting.
Yeah. We've met several times. We've talked a lot, but I've never been to your studio. Describe what the studio looks like.
Actually, it's in my basement. We had a deep basement built so that I have high ceilings. It's just finished off section of the basement. It's probably 1,000 square feet. So I have plenty of room, lots of storage shelving and cabinets for all the props and that sort of thing. I have two shooting tables that I use. One's low. I usually use that for rifles. Or if I need a different angle, I'll shoot from a table that's maybe 18 inches high. If I'm shooting pistols, I generally work off a higher table. It's kind of countertop height, and work from there. I use 5 lights when I shoot, typically.
Do you use flash or continuous?
I use flash. There are modeling lights on the flash, so I can see what each thing is doing before I actually start to shoot. And after a while, you kind of just know how things need to be set. I kind of use a combination of diffuse light and hard lights, and just kind of work through it from there.
Yeah. Now, I'm a firm believer in the fact that when you talk to less experienced photographers, they keep saying, well, when I can afford that Mark 2 or whatever, then that'll take my photography to the next level. I really believe, as have some of the other great photographers that I consider inspiration, have said it's not about the gear, it's about the vision and just getting that light on the sensor. Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think good equipment is important, but it's certainly not what makes a great photograph. For me, if you look at the handgunner or gun stuff that I shoot, you see every contour and every little bit of detail, and it's lit so that all of that shows. And lighting is everythting. And to me, being able to see what your lights are doing and being able to understand where the lighting needs to go in relation to the gun will bring out all of that. That's far more important.
Yeah.
Where are your shadows? Where are your hot spots? Just look the way you want to look. And that really just comes from practice. You can't you can't buy that. You just need to do it.
And that's the beauty of back when you and I started. We know the delicious odor of stop bath in an enclosed dark room and all that, to where it was a lot more challenging to take pictures. And now with digital cameras and digital phone cameras and all that, you can just blast away and take thousands of pictures, which we kind of tend to be guilty of. But that is a great way, provided you have to actually go back and critique your own work. Don't just go through 40 shots and go, okay, this one's not bad. Look at the other 39 and figure out what you did wrong to get that right shot.
Yeah. Speaking of going back to the stop bath days, I think that's one of the amazing things about my predecessors at Handgunner, especially like Ashur Nagata. He did this on film, man. That's just such a huge challenge, and he was so good at it. It's I sometimes when I'm working, I think about having to do this on film, and I'm so thankful that I just don't have to do that, because it's so you can see what you're getting right away, and you don't have to wait for the film to be processed and then realize you have a problem and start over.
I still do that with digital. I can't imagine what it would be like using film.
I'm just so glad that I don't have to do that anymore. The first half of my career was with film, and the second half digital. So I've done both. And
there's no more horrifying thing as a newspaper photographer. They send you to capture something pretty important, and it all comes out blurry. How do I explain this?
Yeah, no reshoot either.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's go ahead and get into some of the technical stuff. What is your kind of go-to setup? I'm sure it's a DSLR with what, like 105, or what do you use mainly?
Yeah, handguns typically. DSLR. My style kind of incorporates a little bit of wide-angle distortion. For that, I use a 24-70 L glass, and then for longer shots or a little more distortion-free, I'll use a 105, and those two seem to where I shoot about 90% of everything I do with those two lenses.
And I assume you stop it down all the way to get everything in glorious tack sharp focus?
Yeah, I do. Sometimes not. Some lenses, the 24-70 is actually the sweet spot's kind of in the middle of that range. And most lenses kind of have a sweet spot, so you kind of need to figure out where that is. But generally pretty well stopped down. Like I said, I use 5 lights, 2 400 watt flash heads, and 3 200 watt flash heads.
Now, when you're shooting, we know when we're working with you that the photographs come in layers so that we can make the background darker. Or do you shoot composite, or do you do one big shoot and then we split it out in Photoshop?
The covers are always composite images. I usually shoot the gun itself separately and then clip that out in Photoshop from the background. And then I shoot whatever is behind that on the cover. I shoot that separately, and that's usually kind of darkened down a bit. And then typically in Photoshop, there's a neutral density layer between the foreground gun image and the background image. And the reason I do that is because on covers, you've got all kinds of text. And depending on the colors they're using, the text they're using, the fonts they're using, the background could be really distracting. So that neutral density layer kind of gives them the ability to lighten or darken the background layer as they need to. Typically inside for lead shots and spreads and detail shots, those are single images.
What about lighting bores? I just had a reader mail about a month ago asking, well, now, how do you guys do that? And I know everybody's got kind of their own pet technique, but how do you do it?
The best way to do it is to use a little LED lighting on a kind of a borescope sort of setup. Makes it easy. I once had a client ask me to shoot a full-length 16-inch bore on an AR barrel and have it all in focus, and that was a nightmare. But I do it with an LED, just a little fiber optic scope. and you can buy them on Amazon for $20 or maybe a little more, $25, and just put it in through the ejection port and feed it out that way. In some cases where you're showing the whole gun with a lit bore, you kind of have to do multiple images, one with the scope in and then one without, and just kind of piece that together in Photoshop. That's how I do it anyway.
Yeah. Talk about what are some of your other favorite lighting tricks? You were telling me recently about using the dog cone.
Yeah, it actually works really well. And I did some work for a company that made springs for guns and magazines, and it was a catalog shoot, and they wanted all their spring shots to have to be shadow free, which is really kind of impossible without kind of a light tint sort of setup. So seeing as this was kind of a once and done kind of thing, I didn't want to have to buy anything. So we had a large dog collar. We have Newfoundlands here. It's a 150, 60 pound dog. And so I had a really large dog collar, which is essentially a cone, and it was clear. So I spray painted, I took some white spray paint and just put kind of a translucent paint job over it, and then shot the springs, shot straight down through the neck hole of the collar, and it worked perfectly.
Now, to clarify, when we say collar, it's actually one of those cones that they put over the dog.
Yeah, and we just happened to have one on hand, and I tried it, and it worked. So I fooled around with it a little bit, and you actually can get really nice photographs through this collar because it diffuses the light 360 degrees. There are no shadows, no hot spots. So for kind of a basic sort of nice looking photograph, it worked really well. And just shoot down through the neck hole in the collar, the smaller neck end. And you can just use any sort of background that's interesting behind it, lay the gun on it and shoot through it. You can do it in sunlight. You can do it with two hot lights, one 180 degrees apart. And the cost of the collar is like $12 for the biggest size. So if you're looking for a really inexpensive way to get a pretty decent photograph, that works really well.
Yeah. And a lot of folks, like my house, most of the walls are white, the ceilings are white, and I use that quite a bit. I've got umbrellas and diffusers and all that, and I found in my particular situation, in my spare bedroom studio, I take my flash units, and I've got them about 2 feet from the ceiling, and I bounce it right off the ceiling, and it's a wonderful diffuser. So bouncing is a glorious thing off a white wall.
Yeah, actually, it works really well. And even for a small on-camera flash, you can rotate the head of the flash into a piece of white cardboard or foam core or something like that to the side. So yeah, aside from having the ceiling to use, if you need lighting from the sides, you can just any piece of pure white cardboard or foam core or something like that can be bounced into and will just diffuse it really nicely. Actually, it gives almost the same effect as having an expensive softbox in the studio.
Well, talk about if people don't have 5 studio flashes, if folks don't have the resources to do that. I've done it. I've used everything from LED flashlights to painter's lights. Talk a little bit about kind of the improvised photo studio.
Even to go get some like shop lights at Home Depot will actually work fine. You really need to use some diffusion with it. You don't want that harsh light with hot spots on the slide and deep shadows. So if you can take even lamps from the living room or shop lights and that sort of thing, if you can get some diffusion on them, by that, either through the shade or a bed sheet, anything will work fine just to kind of take that harshness out of the light. Once it's diffused, then it becomes a lot easier to work with.
Yeah. I'm always on the lookout for photo backgrounds and improvised photo gear and all that. And one thing I found at my local hardware store, they had a whole stack of, I think they were drawer liners, and basically they were very thin, translucent pieces of plastic. I mean, like a 64th inch. And I guess they were to line the bottom of your drawers or something, but they were perfect for eye tape or clothespin them on lights when I need more diffusion. And it works really good. So there's lots of stuff out there. You don't have to go to a quote unquote photo supply store. I actually like that. When I'm bored sometimes, I go to the hardware store and look for photo supplies that are masquerading as hardware.
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to a scrapyard and get sheets of rusty metal or diamond plate or that sort of thing. They're pretty cheap. Truth be told, and I've never told anyone this, but most of the backgrounds you see in guns and handgunner are stone or wood, appear to be stone or wood. They're actually ceramic floor tiles. I have a tile place close by, and they cater to builders and interior decorators and that sort of thing. And they have more backgrounds than you could use in your lifetime. And they photograph really well, and they will give them to you in small quantities. They give them out all day long to builders and decorators. So if you have maybe 4 square feet of floor tile, you can shoot a pistol on that. It looks really good. Depending on what I'm doing, I may leave the seams in or Photoshop them out. But if you can find a tile place, they'll generally give you small quantities of tile.
Well, what a great tip, because I just realized I've got several boxes of photo backgrounds out in my barn. So you may see those in an upcoming issue of Guns Magazine.
Well, and there are so many varied tiles that, I've been shooting guns a long time. I've been using the tiles for a long time, and I rarely use the same ones twice. Some of the wood textured tiles I use from time to time, but otherwise just drive across town and get some more tiles.
Now, speaking of backgrounds, we have a style at Guns, not necessarily, I mean, Rob has his style, but in the actual stories, most of the photographs are done by either myself or the writers. We tend to shoot on white, and people ask, well, how do you get those seamless white backgrounds? Well, do you want to explain that?
Are you talking about like seamless paper?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can buy rolls of white, black, gray, virtually any color from a photo supply store. They're pretty inexpensive. They come in rolls from probably 4 feet to maybe 12 feet in width. And you just roll them out. It kind of, for the average guy shooting gun pictures to put on a forum or a website or something, a roll of white or black paper will last forever.
And the technique is you set it near the camera, get it all set up, and then the back of the paper basically lifts up so there's no seam between, say, a vertical and horizontal plane.
Yeah, just run it along the bottom of your it would be on your tabletop, and then just let that curve straight up to whatever you're using to hold the roll of paper. And get a nice seamless background. Now
let's talk about the one thing that makes me a little bit insane, and I've been guilty of it too, but this is a constant battle I fight, and that's focus. Because guns, especially long guns, are long objects, and if you know anything about photography, it's I wouldn't say impossible, but it's very challenging to take a picture of a gun and have everything from muzzle to butt plate in focus. Talk a little bit about getting focus right.
Well, there are limits to focus no matter what you do. Certain lenses at certain apertures will give you a set amount of depth of field. So you kind of need to choose the focusing plane very carefully. Typically on an AR, if I'm shooting at a 45 degree angle, for instance, with the muzzle, say, up and left, I'll put the focus probably right in front of the magazine. But you need to be careful because, as you said, it's very difficult to get it. So choose those angles carefully. The more extreme the angle is, the harder time you'll have getting everything in focus. So shoot accordingly. And another option, and this is kind of a simple fix, especially since camera sensors have a lot more pixels these days, is just back up and shoot it very loose. The distance will give you more depth of field, and you can always crop the photo to the image or to the subject. So shooting it really tight at an extreme angle is virtually impossible to to pull off. The other option, if you want to spend a lot of money, is perspective control lenses, which allow you to kind of manipulate all that. But yeah, I'm not going to get into that. I have one. I don't use it very often, but yeah,
I was going to say someday when I grow up, I want one, but there's a lot of other things, including like prescription medication and mortgage, before I buy one of those.
Yeah.
So let's talk about something that kind of an advanced topic, but basically the idea of color balance. And if you're not into photography enough to understand color balance, you may have to disregard this portion. But for folks that understand that, modern cameras do a pretty good job of setting color temperature, but yet I still see a lot of poorly balanced pictures, especially on websites on the internet, because there's a lot of different factors. Guns are reflective and all that. Talk a little bit about getting a good color balance on your photos.
Well, it's all dependent on the type of light you're using, whether it's sunlight or incandescent light or flash tube. They all have their own color balance, and you'll see on your camera it's measured in degrees Kelvin. You need to just make sure that the color balance setting you're using in your camera is appropriate for the lights that you're using or for sunlight. And they can be customized. Actually, some of the newer cameras will allow you to very easily customize, and you can go into the color temperature setting or the color balance setting in the camera, and some of them have sliders that really allow you to fine tune your color balance for whatever light you're using at the time. But you need to pay attention to just make sure that the color balance you're using, the setting in the camera, is appropriate for the lights that you're using.
Yeah, and one of the things that I struggle with when I'm doing photo editing is that black gun actually black, or is it gray, or is it purple or blue? Because we say a gun is blued or it's black or whatever, but by the time it gets on a sensor and then appears on your monitor, which of course translates differently to the printed page, you've got to pay very close attention to. You may be fixing highlights or things like that, and then suddenly you've got a purple AR-15.
Yeah, AR-15 manufacturers are really funny when their ARs appear pink in their catalog. There's actually a little trick to work around that too. If you're using Lightroom and you've picked up a cast in the AR or really any gun, use the brush tool and just desaturate the AR. ARs being all black, you can desaturate it and take that color cast out.
Let me make a note of that.
Yeah.
Something else on the same topic, and I see this all the time, is it's really nice to shoot a gun in the shade especially on a sunny day, because you get a nice diffuse light. But reflections, guns are reflective, and you get all kinds of weird things. I remember one set of pictures I got, they were beautifully done by the writer, but he was wearing a red shirt, and you saw this weird red blob. But most commonly, I see a bright blue sky, sometimes almost like a lightsaber along the barrel. Talk about color reflections and dealing with that.
The simple trick for getting yourself out of a gun picture or your bright red shirt is to put the camera on timer mode and hit the shutter and walk away and let it take the picture in timer mode, and then come back and do whatever else you wanted to do. The other thing, if you're reflecting things around you, take those white or black foam core panels we talked about earlier, and just kind of prop them up around so that there's really nothing to reflect in the immediate area. Also, a nice way to get gun pictures, especially for rifles, is in your garage, using what's called open shade. Garage door open, sun directly, say, midday, or not shining into the garage. Your garage generally white. You get a nice concrete background maybe, and the light out on the floor towards close to the door without being in direct sunlight is actually very nice light for just a very quick shot. That works out really well. Actually, there's some guys on the gun forums that use that technique, and they get great photographs. And because the light is outside, it tends to be darker inside. As you get further from the door, it fades off to black. And it's a really nice improvised kind of studio. it can work out really well like that. But yeah, don't shoot it in direct light. Is kind of what I'm getting at there.
Well, that touches on the next topic of contrast, and everybody wants to take great hero pics when they're at the range on a bright sunny day, and then they're very disappointed. Talk a little bit about, I know you don't do a lot of in the field type of work, but talk about going further with contrast, direct light, indirect light, things like that.
Actually, in that situation, there are a couple ways to go. I typically, in that situation, would use fill flash, gun up and the sun rather up and behind them. You can actually use that if someone were, say, standing facing 3 o'clock or maybe 4 o'clock to the sun, so that the sun would be over their right shoulder. Will actually light the gun very nicely. Then you can use fill flash to actually fill in everything and faces and that sort of thing. And we'll actually fill in that little shadow under their ball cap too. The other way too is if you're just using your phone for the action photo, take a piece of that white foam core, place the sun over the right shoulder, and then have the foam core in front to fill in that light on the front. Actually works really nicely, and it's a $3 fix.
And another thought along those lines I discovered, and I think you would agree with me, that I learned a long time ago. You can shoot or you can shoot. You can't really do either one if you're trying to do both. Any other great field improvised tips for shooting good gun pictures?
Keep your toes out of your rifle shots and make sure your carpet's clean. It drives me nuts when I see toes. First of all, if you put them up on a gun form, they're going to make fun of your toes.
Yeah.
I guess going back to the first thing we talked about, and that is look at what it is you're shooting and see, the ability to see is more important than all the equipment. And take a close look at it. Look at every little aspect and every side of the gun, the sides facing you, the sides facing upward, and just move your lights accordingly or move the gun if you're shooting in sunlight, and just pay attention to how the light looks when you're moving the gun, because you'll learn a lot doing that. And it's just a matter of taking the time to understand it, how all those lights at different angles affect your picture. If you pay attention to that, you'll get very good at it very quickly.
Exactly. Great advice. Now, before we get out of here, one thing that people tend to forget, but Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever particular flavor of editing program you use, that's really critical to digital photography. My biggest tip to folks is don't overdo it, because that's what we tend to do, and we've all done that. But if you can really see the editing or corrections in a photo, you probably didn't take a good photo to start with. Talk a little bit about some of your thoughts as you're going through that post-production process.
Typically, for me, I don't do a lot of Photoshop on the gun itself, other than maybe dust or a little streak of oil or something that I missed when I was cleaning it. The way I shoot with all the lights to get all of those details and contours and everything else, I shoot for the gun. Everything else in the picture, props are of lesser importance, so I don't worry about those as much. That's kind of where I do my Photoshop work. I'll kind of tone that down, darken things down. As you said, if it's obvious it's been Photoshopped, with exceptions, sometimes it looks really cool if it's taken way overboard. Take your time with it. Learn how to use all of those tools as well. There are a million options in Photoshop and Lightroom.
And I will say, camera filters, like on camera phones, have become so ubiquitous, and that's all well if you're into that. And I do like a good bleach bypass effect, but I will point out from an editor standpoint, if you're actually trying to get pictures published, even on the web, take a standard picture and then let the publication or their people do whatever effects. I get occasionally photos that have some really bizarro filters applied to them, and that's not very helpful to me as an editor.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're going to send a stylized photo like that, make sure it fits the style of the publication too.
Exactly.
Send both, but if it doesn't fit the style of the publication, it's not going to get used.
Yep.
So as far as post production, clean everything up. Like I said, I light for the gun exclusively and kind of let other things fall where they may. I do pay attention to it, but part of my style in Photoshop afterwards is kind of separating the gun from the background with some masks and that sort of thing. And it's not obvious, but if you saw it before and after, there's a huge difference. So
yeah, you touched on something that I still occasionally run into, and I know you do too. Talk about cleaning, because there's nothing more aggravating than taking a great series of pictures and then realizing the black gun is filthy. It's got all kinds of dust and cheeseburgers on it.
Yeah. I usually clean the gun kind of the way some of the guns I get in for photography have been fired before. Sometimes they've been cleaned, sometimes they haven't. So I usually start with just cleaning the gun, and I don't go crazy inside, but the outside gets a good cleaning with a little solvent. Wipe down with some oil and rags. You can go to Harbor Freight and buy packages of surgical towels, which are lint-free, and you can get a whole bundle for a couple of bucks. But sometimes I'll use acetone for persistence. I have some guys that insist on using WD-40 as a gun oil, which is impossible. I guess it makes it good as an oil, but for photography, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
I'll use some acetone, which works really well. You just need to make sure you get it off very quickly. Otherwise, it'll streak. Typically, my shoots go over a couple days. So what I'll do is clean the gun, get it all nice and pretty, and stick it in a freezer bag, a Ziploc freezer bag, in between shoots to keep it clean. That works out really well. And then when you get it out, you kind of need to wipe it down every day anyway. But yeah, and there's always going to be Photoshop for dust, and of course you inadvertently touch the slide with your thumb and leave a nice big thumbprint.
Yeah. I use a blower, a handheld, bulb.
Yeah.
I discovered that canned air will leave residue, and the stuff they put in it now stinks so bad you can taste it. But I use just a rubber hand bulb with a little nozzle.
Yeah, they actually make those hand bulbs for cleaning off camera sensors. They work pretty well.
Right.
The thing about canned air that you have to watch too is if you have your background set up and a bunch of nice props and everything, when you hit the canned air, it can actually make it worse because it's blowing any dust that's on your set all over the place.
Yep.
So if you're going to use canned air to blow the gun off, take the gun away from your set and blow it off and then bring it back and put it in place.
Yeah, I will say I've made that mistake. You carefully set up all your foam core and you've got the reflections just right. And you think, well, I'll just hit the gun with a little blast to get that little speck of dust, and things go flying.
Yeah, bullets and all kinds of things.
Yeah. How do you secure guns? Say you're doing just any background, I guess. How do you secure guns and ammunition? The ammo is such a pain. If you just want some bullets, they tend to roll everywhere. How do you do it?
I have all kinds of things, everything from tape to little blocks of wood, small dowels, but just to keep things from rolling. Go to Home Depot, they get some plumber's putty. It lasts forever. It doesn't dry out. And you can just take off the tiniest bits to keep things from rolling or sliding. If you're placing a gun on a Kydex holster, it's going to want to slide every different direction. Just take a bit of that putty, maybe the size of a dime, stick it on the backside of the gun, press it onto the Kydex, boom, stays in place.
A great idea I'd never heard before, and I've got plumber's putty out here. I was going to say my little trick is when you get a new credit card or debit card, they come stuck to a letter-sized piece of paper, and that's stuck on, I don't know the technical term, but I call it boogers. It's a clear, real stretchy, but very tacky substance, and I save those little strings of that, pull them off, and that works great. It'll hold things, and being clear, it won't cast too many shadows. You still got to be careful with it so you don't see it, but that works pretty good too.
Yeah, actually that would work fine. It sounds like it pretty much does the same thing as the putty.
Yeah. Yep. Everybody's got their little tricks. I like boogers.
The other option too is never mind. I'll just keep that in my head. The other option too that works really well is hot glue guns. You can secure anything, and if you're wondering how I stand up guns on their base pad, that's how I do it.
Okay.
Hot glue gun, and the nice thing is that it sticks, but it doesn't stick too well. So if you need to peel it off the magazine to send it back to the base of the magazine, and it really doesn't leave a lot of residue or anything else. And actually, you can get a gun to do just about anything with the right amount of hot glue.
Very cool. Great tips, Rob. We appreciate you taking time to talk to us and share a few of your secret inside expert tips.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, it's fun.
Well, I certainly enjoyed chatting with Rob, and this old shutter dog even learned a few new tricks to make my own photography better. With that, we hope you're enjoying the Guns Magazine podcast. Please tell all your friends, even the liberals. Guns Magazine is #1 in the business, and we're using our decades of friendships to bring you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you have questions, comments, or a guest you'd like to recommend for the show, please email me, editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you don't miss out on anything by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast directory and YouTube. Of course, you can always listen and download our episodes at gunsmagazine.com. And while you're at it, don't forget to check out our sister publication, American Handgunner Magazine, at americanhandgunner.com. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast for the entire crew at FMG Publications. I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.